In this video, we will be looking at global cooldowns and so-called weaving. First, in your Actions and Traits menu, everything found under Actions or Role are some form of action. These actions are then divided into three categories: Weapon Skills, Spells, and Abilities. Weapon Skills and Spells are commonly referred to as Global Cooldowns, or GCDs for short, as they incur global cooldown period on most actions of their shared type. By default, this cooldown period is 2.5 seconds, but can be reduced either by passive effects or stats such as skill speed and spell speed. Meanwhile, abilities, more commonly referred to as off-global cooldowns, or oGCDs for short, do not incur such a cooldown and are almost always confined to each their own individual cooldown period. What all actions do have in common, however, is that using any action incurs an animation lock. This prevents you from doing anything else. The animation lock lasts for about half a second plus your latency. A safe rule of thumb is to assume approximately 0.625 seconds of animation locking, which is exactly a quarter of 2.5 seconds. Additionally, it should be noted that animation locking will in most cases not lock the movement of your character, it simply locks you out of using any actions. Furthermore, this animation lock starts at different times depending on the kind of action you used. If the action you used is instant, then the animation lock begins immediately after the action begins, meaning you can use your next action about a quarter ways through the GCD period, assuming your next action is an oGCD. If the action you used had a casting time, most often associated with spells, but there are exceptions, then the animation lock happens during the last bit of the cast time before the spell finishes. This means you can use your next GCD or oGCD as if the animation lock already passed. This also causes the thing known as slidecasting. You can start moving without interrupting your spell when the animation lock has begun. However, keep in mind that if you cast a spell with a 2.5 second cast time, you have no time to use oGCDs before your next GCD, not at least without clipping your GCD. Clipping is, in essence, the idea of delaying your GCD. This is something you never want, since your oGCD can be done whenever, but the GCD is throttled a lot and is the most significant part of your job's output. Simply put, in most cases, you want to make sure that there is at least 0.625 seconds before your GCD ends if you want to use an oGCD. This means, to be safe, weapon skills and spells need to have a cast time of 1.5 or less by default for this to happen. This brings us to weaving. Weaving is the concept of weaving oGCDs in between two GCDs. Using just one oGCD between two GCDs is known as Singleweaving. This is common for all jobs. You need to use instant GCDs or GCDs with a cast time of at most 1.5 seconds to pull this off without clipping. Weaving two oGCDs in between two GCDs is known as double weaving and requires that you use instant GCDs to make it fit without clipping due to the amount of animation locking involved. Also, if you have particularly bad latency, double weaving may be hard or even impossible without clipping, especially on fast jobs like the Monk. Weaving three oGCDs in between two GCDs is hypothetically a possibility, but is generally considered risky and requires incredibly good latency as well as optimized gear for this purpose. To explain this, let's assume the 0.625 seconds animation lock per action. Then single weaving is 0.625 from the instant GCD plus 0.625 from the oGCD, resulting in a total of 1.25 seconds. Doing the same for double weaving, we add an additional 0.625, getting a total of 1.875 seconds. If we do the same for the hypothetical triple weave, we get 2.5, which suggests we would have exactly enough time to do this, but most everyone has at least some speed on their gear, so that GCD will be less than 2.5 seconds. Not to mention that if your latency is anything over 0.125, then this would fail due to latency instead. The conclusion is that triple weaving is possible, but should be used only when absolutely necessary, such as for specific opening combinations. As an extra aside, certain actions incur an especially long animation lock. This is never clarified from the tooltip and simply has to be either assumed or observed in practice. These actions include, but are not limited to, all Dragoon jumps, yes, even the faster high jump, and Red Mage's displacement action. The easiest way to interact with these actions is to never double weave them and only use them after instant GCDs. Lastly, we touch on early weaving and late weaving. Early weaving is very intuitive since it is simply using your oGCD immediately after your GCD, as early as possible. This is the most common weaving since it is used for most attacking and movement related oGCDs. Late weaving requires a bit of explanation. When you apply a damage buff that affects your GCDs, you want as many GCDs to be affected as possible. Fitting oGCDs in the damage buff is almost never an issue since it is only a matter of cooldowns, and so they rarely ever play a role in this consideration. To do late weaving, you delay the use of the oGCD as long as you can. In the perfect world, you would cast buffs such as the Paladin's Fight or Flight or Warrior's Inner Release exactly at 0.625 seconds before your GCD finishes. Alternatively, you can also make sure to pair these late weave actions with an action which you would use anyway to fill the early weave for the double weave. This is not exactly as optimal, but is perfectly fine for all content. If you have any questions or need clarifications, you are welcome to leave a comment down below. Thank you for watching.